began like any other evening in the gated luxury of an affluent Los Angeles neighborhood. The air buzzed with cicadas. A faint breeze carried the smell of freshly mowed lawns, and families settled into their nightly routines. Then came the gunshots. The first was sharp and deliberate, cutting through the quiet. The second followed moments later, louder, filled with rage. Porch lights flickered on as neighbors peeked from behind curtains, fear etched on their faces. "Call 911, someone muttered from the shadows. Minutes later, the shrill wail of sirens broke the uneasy silence. Red and blue lights painted the Langley mansion as officers stormed the property. Onlookers whispered behind the barricades. Gunshots? In this neighborhood? No one had answers, only fear and speculation. Inside the sprawling home, detectives Laura Monroe and Sam Harris moved cautiously through the marble-lined halls. The scent of gunpowder hung in the air, sharp and unmistakable. "Master bedroom," an officer called. Monroe stepped inside, her sharp gaze taking in the carnage. Dr. Richard Langley lay sprawled across the bed, blood pooling on the once immaculate white sheets. On the floor nearby was Emily Harper, a handgun still clutched in her lifeless hand. "Murder suicide?" Harris asked. Monroe crouched near Emily, noticing faint bruises on her wrists and glass shards on the carpet. "Doesn't feel that simple," she murmured. The room was a mess. Shattered glass on the floor, wine glasses tipped over on the nightstand, and subtle signs of a struggle in the disheveled bedding. Harris picked up a blood-stained photograph, squinting at the faded image. It depicted 3 figures, 2 women and a man, but the faces were too smudged to identify. "And this," Monroe added, holding Emily's phone. Unlocked and glowing, text messages filled the screen. Fragments of an argument, cryptic and unfinished. "Richard Langley," Monroe began, flipping through the surgeon's profile. 15 years married, celebrated professional and philanthropist. Picture-perfect life. Harris glanced at Emily's file. Emily Harper, receptionist, single mom, struggling to stay afloat. "The worlds apart. Doesn't look like they stayed apart," Monroe muttered, glancing at the bed and the photo. On the nightstand, beneath the bloodied photograph, a note lay scrawled in shaky handwriting. "I trusted you." Monroe read the words aloud, her brow furrowed. "Who betrayed who?" Emily's phone buzzed softly. A delayed text notification lit the screen. "You were supposed to wait." Harris sighed. This wasn't just a crime of passion. It's something deeper. The bodies were removed, the evidence logged, but nothing about the case felt ordinary. "What happened here?" Monroe murmured. "How did 2 lives, so different yet so intertwined, end like this?" The Langley mansion fell silent once again, its secrets left to be uncovered. "I need to get some answers," I told the Langley mansion. "How are you going to find this out?" Emily Harper's days blurred together, a cycle of endless tasks and fleeting moments of joy. Her mornings began before sunrise, packing Tyler's lunch while he tugged on her sweater, asking when she'd be home. "Soon, sweetheart," she lied with a smile that never reached her eyes. Her move to Los Angeles had been a gamble, a fresh start after her divorce, away from the suffocating memories of betrayal. Walked around and took a long halt, headed west, toward Pleasanton. The city offered hope, but hope was expensive. Days spent juggling shifts at a diner and a retail store left her drained. Nights were lonelier still, the small apartment quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and Tyler's soft breathing from the next room. Emily's gentle nature masked a growing ache. The world saw her as resilient, but inside she was unraveling, desperate for something, someone, to make her feel whole again. Richard Langley adjusted his tie in the mirror, a ritual that brought no comfort. At 45, he had everything most men aspired to: a prestigious career, a sprawling home, and a wife who could turn heads at any gala. But perfection was a fragile veneer. His marriage to Vanessa had grown cold, their conversations reduced to perfunctory exchanges and veiled criticisms. She was always polished, always poised, but her subtle barbs about his late nights or missed dinners stung more than outright arguments. Richard exhaled, gripping the counter. He longed for something real, something untethered from the expectations that weighed him down. But he was trapped, bound by appearances and a lingering sense of duty. Vanessa Langley greeted guests with the practiced ease of a diplomat, her smile unwavering, her tone honeyed. To the world, she was the epitome of grace. At home, the cracks in her perfect image were harder to conceal. She wasn't blind to Richard's growing distance. The late nights, the distracted looks, the way he avoided her touch, it was all too familiar. Her mother had warned her about men like Richard, men who would stray when the allure of ambition faded. Vanessa poured another glass of wine, staring out the window of their immaculate kitchen. The doubt gnawed at her, but she wouldn't confront him. Not yet. She preferred subtle control, the kind that crept up slowly and suffocated its target before they even realized. The fluorescent lights of the ER buzzed faintly as Emily sat cradling Tyler, his tear-streaked face pressed against her shoulder. She'd been here before, navigating cold glares from overworked nurses and doctors too busy to care. "Tyler Harper?" a warm voice called. Emily looked up to see Dr. Langley, his presence calm and assured. "What happened here?" he asked, crouching to meet Tyler's gaze. "A playground tumble," Emily explained, her voice shaky. Richard examined Tyler with patience, his easy humor coaxing a small smile from the boy. You're brave, kiddo," he said before turning to Emily. "You'll be fine, just a minor sprain." Their eyes met briefly, and Emily felt something she hadn't in years noticed. It started innocently. Richard called a few days later to check on Tyler, his voice warm and genuinely curious. Then came an unexpected visit to their apartment, a small gesture of kindness that felt monumental to Emily. "You didn't have to come," she said, unsure whether to invite him in. "I wanted to," he replied, holding out a small bag of supplies for Tyler's recovery. "I know how hard it can be." As their conversations deepened, Emily found herself sharing details she had. Richard listened, his empathy filling the void her ex-husband had left. It wasn't long before their meetings became less about Tyler and more about each other. Vanessa watched Richard with the scrutiny of someone who had seen too much and knew too little. He was different, quieter, distracted. His phone always turned screen down on the table. "Working late again?" she asked one evening, her tone deceptively casual. He nodded, not meeting her eyes. Vanessa smiled tightly, excusing herself to their bedroom. Once inside, she picked up his jacket, searching the pockets with steady hands. Nothing. She sighed, her fingers brushing the smooth leather of her phone. She needed answers, and she knew exactly how to get them. The private investigator she called promised discretion. Vanessa's heart raced as she gave the details, her composure cracking just slightly. Emily lay awake, Tyler's soft snores breaking the silence. Her phone buzzed, Richard's name lighting the screen. "Can't stop thinking about you." Her heart swelled and sank at the same time. She wanted to believe they were meant to find each other. But the shadow of his wife loomed over every stolen moment. She closed her eyes, picturing a life with Richard, picnics in the park, Tyler finally having a father, a home filled with laughter. But the image was fragile, like a dream slipping through her fingers. She couldn't escape the truth. She was building her happiness on borrowed time. Richard sat across from Emily, the silence heavy between them. His hand, usually warm and reassuring, now felt distant. A subtle but painful reminder of the promises he'd made. "I swear, Emily," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "I'll leave Vanessa. You and Tyler deserve better. I just need time." Emily's gaze faltered, her heart sinking with every word he spoke. Time. It was always time, never action. She clenched her fists, desperately trying to push back the rising wave of doubt. "You've been saying that for months," she whispered, her voice tight with frustration. "How long do I wait, Richard? How long until this is just another broken promise?" His eyes flickered with guilt, and for a moment, Emily saw the man she had fallen for. Vulnerable, torn, but the cracks were becoming too obvious now. Her insecurities gnawed at her, a voice in her head screaming that she was falling into the same trap again, letting herself believe in a man who wasn't capable of loving her fully. "I want to believe you," she said, her voice barely audible, "but I can't keep doing this. I can't keep giving you everything when you've already given it to her." Richard reached for her hand, but she pulled away. His touch no longer felt like comfort. It felt like a reminder of how trapped she was. Vanessa held the envelope in her hands, the thick paper cold against her fingers. She had waited for this moment, for the undeniable truth. The private investigator had delivered exactly what she needed: photos of Richard and Emily, laughing together on a quiet park bench, caught in the intimacy of a stolen kiss. Her jaw tightened as she flipped through the images, each one a brutal confirmation of her suspicions. She had suspected for months, but seeing it all laid out so clearly in black and white made something dark stir within her. She set the photos down on the polished surface of the dining table, her fingers trembling slightly as she traced their edges. No tears, no outbursts of anger. Vanessa had long learned that control was power. Richard had crossed the line, and she would make him pay for it. She wouldn't just forgive him or pretend it didn't matter. All the children, they were such bright promises, Leftian said, clapping another man on the back. This was an opportunity, a way to regain control of her marriage and her reputation. The next evening, Richard walked into their home, his briefcase heavy in his hand. Vanessa was already sitting at the kitchen island, a glass of wine in front of her, her smile cool and knowing. "Hard day?" she asked, her voice deceptively sweet. He dropped his briefcase with a sigh, loosening his tie. "You could say that." Vanessa's eyes gleamed with a subtle menace as she leaned forward. "I had a chat with someone today, a friend of yours." Richard's stomach turned, his mind racing. He hadn't expected this. "What do you mean?" Her lips curled into a smile. "Someone who knows all about your little friendship with Emily Harper." "The single mother from the ER? Richard froze, his heart pounding in his chest. "Vanessa!" She raised a hand, silencing him. "You know, it's always fascinating how some people can be so opportunistic. She saw you as a way out, didn't she? A way to make a better life for herself." Her words were sharp, calculated. They dug deep, planting seeds of doubt. "I'm sure she's a good woman, Richard, but don't let her fool you. She's using you. She knows exactly what she's doing." Richard opened his mouth to protest, but the words stuck in his throat. For the first time, he felt a wave of confusion, torn between the woman he had betrayed and the one who controlled his life. Emily sat in her small apartment, staring at her phone. The glow of the screen cast shadows over her face, her eyes scanning every message from Richard, overanalyzing every word. "I'll call you later, I promise. Things are complicated right now. Can we talk tomorrow?" Her mind spiraled. Was Vanessa onto them? Had she figured it out? The distant tone in Richard's last text felt like a warning. He had been avoiding her all week, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Vanessa's shadow was everywhere, looming over them, suffocating their chances of being together. Every time the doorbell rang, every knock on the apartment door, her heart skipped a beat. Was it him? Or was it someone from Vanessa's world? "Get a grip, Emily," she muttered to herself, but the words didn't offer any comfort. What if he's gone? What if she's already won? Her anxiety twisted like a knot in her stomach. Her dreams of a future with Richard, of a new family, began to feel like a fantasy. A story she told herself to escape the crushing weight of reality. Vanessa had planned it meticulously, setting the stage for Emily's fall. The dinner invitation was casual, innocent, an attempt to show Emily that she was sympathetic, understanding of the struggles of single motherhood. But the moment Emily stepped into Vanessa's home, she knew the truth. The air was thick with tension, the warmth of the welcome a mere illusion. "I'm so glad you could join me," Vanessa said, her voice smooth as velvet. "I know life must be difficult for you, especially with everything that's been happening with Tyler." Emily nodded, unsure of where this was going. "It's been hard, yeah." Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes darkening as she met Emily's gaze. "You know, Richard's been under a lot of pressure. I'm sure he's told you that, but I just want to make something clear. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. What do you mean? Vanessa's smile was cold now, her facade slipping. I know about you and my husband, Emily. I know what you've been doing. The words cut through the air, sharp and unrelenting. Vanessa's voice dropped to a whisper. Stay away from Richard. I won't let you destroy what we have. I won't let you manipulate him any longer. Emily recoiled, the sting of Vanessa's words sinking deep into her. In the days that followed, Emily's obsession grew darker, more desperate. She couldn't stop herself. Every text to Richard became a plea, a cry for him to leave Vanessa and be with her. Please, Richard, don't let her win. You promised me. She sent message after message, each one growing more frantic, more accusatory. If you really loved me, you'd be here by now. Stop hiding from the truth. At night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the weight of her own desires and fears crashing down on her. Her heart raced every time her phone buzzed. Each message from Richard, a fragile thread that threatened to snap at any moment. I can't keep doing this, she whispered to the empty room, the words echoing back to her like a cruel reminder. Richard stood outside Emily's apartment, his heart hammering in his chest. He had to end this. He had to make things right with Vanessa. But when Emily opened the door, her face lit up with hope, a smile that broke his heart. I've been waiting for you, she whispered, stepping closer. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. Emily, we need to talk. I can't. Her smile faltered. What do you mean? I can't do this anymore. I need to focus on my family, Richard said, his voice cold and detached. The words hit her like a slap. She stumbled back, her face crumpling. What? After everything? You promised me, Richard. His expression softened for a moment, but he didn't reach for her. I'm sorry. I never should have let it go this far. I've made my choice. Emily's chest tightened, a sob escaping her lips. You've used me, she whispered, her voice breaking. You were never going to leave her, were you? Richard's face twisted with guilt, but he said nothing. His silence was all the answer she needed. The sound of Emily's doorbell echoed through the stillness of the apartment, sharp and unforgiving. Richard stood outside, a man burdened by the weight of guilt, responsibility, and fear. He had made his decision. He was ending it. No more lies, no more broken promises. When Emily opened the door, her eyes locked onto his, searching for the warmth, the love that had once been there. But it was gone now, replaced by cold determination. I can't do this anymore, Emily, Richard said, his voice strained but resolute. I have to move forward with my life, with Vanessa. It's over. The words hit Emily like a slap. A flash of hurt crossed her face, but she quickly masked it with anger. So, this is it? You're walking away? After everything? Her voice trembled, but she wasn't about to let him see her break. I'm sorry, he muttered, avoiding her gaze. But this isn't working. Emily's eyes burned with betrayal, her chest tightening with each breath. You used me, she spat, the accusation like venom on her tongue. You promised me, again and again, and now you just walk away? Richard opened his mouth to explain, but the words faltered. He couldn't defend himself. He had no defense. You're pathetic, Richard, she snapped, stepping back from the door. You're nothing but a coward, a liar. The silence that followed was suffocating, and Richard finally turned, his heart heavy with the weight of his decision. As he walked away, Emily felt the walls closing in around her, suffocating under the weight of rejection. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, Emily's world tilted. Her hands shook, her breathing erratic as her emotions spiraled into chaos. Betrayal, despair, humiliation. They all collided inside her, a storm she couldn't control. She paced around her apartment, tears mixing with anger, unable to escape the suffocating tension. Her mind raced, the hurt consuming her thoughts. How could he do this? Then her eyes caught the gleam of metal, the handgun she kept in the drawer, safely hidden, just in case. She hesitated for only a moment. The rage in her chest surged like wildfire, and in that moment she knew what she had to do. She had no clear plan, no rational thought, only the gnawing desire to confront him, to make him feel the weight of what he had done. Grabbing the gun, she tucked it into her bag. The decision was made. She was going to make him understand. The Langley mansion loomed before Emily, the large, imposing structure, an intimidating reminder of the life Richard had chosen. She was trembling as she rang the doorbell, the sound deafening in the quiet of the night. Vanessa opened the door, her expression unreadable. Behind her, the soft glow of the chandeliers illuminated Richard, who stood frozen in the entryway, his gaze flickering with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" Vanessa's voice was cold, laced with contempt. "This is neither the time nor the place." Emily's eyes flared with fury. "I'm here to make him understand. You too. You think you've won, don't you?" Richard took a step forward, his voice hoarse. "Emily, this is a mistake. You need to leave." "I'm not leaving until you hear me," Emily snapped, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. "You promised me, Richard. You told me you were going to leave her, and now you're just, what? Walking away." Vanessa stood silently, watching from a distance, her eyes narrowing. She was calm, poised, a stark contrast to Emily's unraveling composure. "I can't do this anymore. It's over, Emily. Just go." Richard's voice was firm, but there was a hollow quality to it that made Emily's blood boil. "I don't think so," Emily hissed. Vanessa stepped forward, her eyes flashing with a cold, calculating gleam. "You really are pathetic, aren't you?" she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "Clinging to a man who doesn't even want you anymore. A delusional woman who can't accept reality." Emily's breath hitched, the sting of Vanessa's words cutting deeper than she cared to admit. "You think you've got control, don't you? But you're just as pathetic as he is, hiding behind your perfect little life, pretending it's all real." Vanessa's smile never faltered. "You've always been a backup plan, Emily. The comfort of a lonely man who needs someone to fix him, but never a chance to be the one who truly matters." Richard's voice was shaky now. "Vanessa, stop!" But it was too late. Vanessa had already dug in deep, her words driving a wedge between them that couldn't be removed. "Do you really think he's going to leave me?" Vanessa taunted. She sat in the car and sat still while she thought. "But you really think he's going to leave me?" Vanessa taunted. "Do you think you're special? You're nothing but a fool who got played." Emily could feel the walls closing in. Everything inside her began to tremble. She didn't care anymore. She didn't care what happened. In a daze, Emily's hand slipped into her bag. The gun. She could feel it there, cold and real. Her pulse quickened, her breath shallow and fast. Everything inside her screamed for release. "Stop!" Richard's voice cracked, desperate, but it didn't reach her. She was too far gone. Vanessa's face went pale as Emily pulled the gun out, her hands shaking, her mind a blur of rage and heartbreak. "Emily, put the gun down," Richard pleaded, his voice soft, laced with fear. But the words didn't reach her. All that mattered now was the weight of the gun in her hands, the pounding of her heart in her ears. "You promised me, Richard," she shouted, tears blurring her vision. "You promised you would leave her. You lied to me. You used me." Richard's hands were raised in surrender, but it was too late. Emily's finger tightened on the trigger, her body shaking with emotion, her mind screaming for control she couldn't find. The gunshot rang out like a thunderclap, shattering the fragile tension. Richard collapsed to the floor, his body going limp, his lifeless eyes staring up at Emily, a cruel reminder of everything she had lost. Vanessa screamed, her hands shooting out toward Richard's body. "No! Richard!" Her composure shattered in an instant, but she was still counting. "Please, Emily, please don't do this. You've already taken everything. Don't take me too," Vanessa begged, her voice trembling with fear. Emily stood frozen, the gun still in her hand, her eyes wide with disbelief at what she had just done. "Please," Vanessa whimpered, her face pale, her voice a mixture of terror and regret. "I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this. I was wrong." Emily's mind raced, guilt and anger warring for dominance inside her, but there was no escape now, no undoing what had been done. The sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second, but Emily barely heard them. The weight of her actions pressed down on her like a heavy blanket, suffocating her every breath. Her hand, still gripping the gun, trembled uncontrollably. She could feel the cool metal against her skin, the reality of her choices flooding her thoughts. There was no going back. She turned the gun on herself, her finger hovering over the trigger for a moment that stretched into eternity. The images of Richard, of Vanessa, of everything she had lost flashed before her eyes, and then, with a final deafening crack, it was over. Emily crumpled to the floor beside Richard's body, the weight of death hanging thick in the air. The Langley home, once full of grandeur and pretense, now stood as a stark symbol of betrayal, loss, and violence. The sirens drew closer, but it was too late. The tragic end of Emily's life, of the shattered dreams and broken promises, was already written in blood. The dim glow of the police station's fluorescent lights flickered as Detective Marks pored over the evidence. The case was unfolding like a nightmare. Each text message, every call log, each email adding to the grim picture. The affair, the betrayal, the final tragic moments. It was all there, a tangled mess of broken trust and shattered lives. His partner, Detective Hayes, scanned through Emily's co-worker's statements, finding a disturbing pattern of escalating despair. She wasn't herself the last few weeks, quiet, withdrawn. She kept mentioning Richard, saying he was going to leave his wife, but it never happened, one of her colleagues had said. Hayes leaned back, rubbing his temple. Vanessa's friends paint a different picture. They talk about her becoming paranoid, almost obsessive. Something snapped in all of them. Richard, Emily, Vanessa. They were all spiraling toward this moment. Marks nodded grimly, setting down the file. The whole thing was a ticking time bomb. The morning after the tragedy, the media descended upon the small town like a swarm of vultures. News outlets plastered headlines across their pages, sensationalizing the affair that had led to murder-suicide. "Lover's Triangle turns deadly," read one headline, while another blared, "Betrayal, rage, and murder in the Langley mansion." The public was divided. Some sympathized with Emily, the heartbroken woman scorned by a man who had promised her everything. She was just trying to keep the family together, one commentator argued. Richard led her on, then discarded her like trash. Others condemned her actions, furious that she had taken 2 lives. "A mother's love is supposed to be unconditional," one woman posted online. But to take a life, especially her child's father's life, that's unforgivable. The scandal had gripped the town, and soon the world. Everyone had their own opinion, but no one truly knew the depths of the pain and betrayal that had consumed these 3 lives. At the hospital, where Richard had once been a revered surgeon, the news of his death hit hard, but it was followed by whispers and doubts. His colleagues struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the revelations of his double life. "He was a great surgeon, no question about it," one of his colleagues, Dr. Matthews, said quietly. "But this affair, I didn't see it coming." Rumors about Richard's personal life spread like wildfire. His once pristine reputation was now tainted by the affair, the violence, and the heartache. People began to question everything about him, wondering if they had ever truly known the man behind the white coat. The man who had promised his wife a life of devotion while secretly wooing another woman. The man who had used both women as pawns in his own twisted game of desire and control. For some, it was a betrayal of the highest order. For others, it was a warning about the dangers of unchecked ambition and moral compromise. Vanessa's family was reeling from the tragedy, unable to reconcile the image of the perfect wife with the woman who had secretly manipulated and deceived everyone in her life. Her parents, once proud of their daughter's pristine image, now had to confront the painful truth of her involvement in the affair. Her mother, overcome with grief, whispered through tears, "She was always so careful, so perfect. How could I have missed it? How could I not see what was happening?" Vanessa's friends were similarly torn. They mourned the loss of the woman they thought they knew, but there was an undeniable sense of guilt. She was always so charming, so controlling. She could make anyone believe anything, one of her closest friends confided. But behind the mask, I never saw her as this person. Vanessa's legacy, once defined by elegance and sophistication, had now become a tragic story of manipulation and deceit, and those closest to her were left questioning everything they thought they knew. Tyler, Emily's 7-year-old son, stood at the center of it all, innocent, confused, and utterly devastated. The tragic death of his mother and father had left him orphaned, alone, and emotionally scarred. He had no words to make sense of what had happened, no understanding of the reasons behind the violence that had shattered his family. When Emily's estranged sister, Rachel, stepped forward to take him in, the weight of responsibility settled heavy on her shoulders. Rachel had not seen Tyler in years, and the grief of losing her sister only made the situation more complicated. But she was determined to give Tyler a stable and loving home. "You don't have to understand it all right now, sweetheart," she whispered, holding him close as the tears rolled down his tiny face. "We'll get through this together." But Tyler's silent struggle was evident. His eyes, once full of light, now seemed distant and hollow. He clung to Rachel, but there was a part of him that would forever remain broken. His future, once full of promise, was now clouded by the scars of a tragedy he couldn't possibly comprehend. The pain in his eyes haunted Rachel. She had to do more than offer comfort. She had to be the mother Emily never could be. As the dust began to settle, the people involved were forced to confront the true consequences of their actions. For Richard, Emily, and Vanessa, their lives had been defined by betrayal, manipulation, and unchecked emotions. The affair, the lies, the violence. These choices had led to irreversible destruction. The community, still grappling with the shock, began to speak in hushed tones about the moral lessons to be learned. Betrayal didn't just affect the ones involved. It rippled outward, causing harm to everyone in its wake. Emily's heartbreak had turned into tragedy. Vanessa's ambition had led to her downfall. Richard's promises had ultimately shattered all who believed in him. And now, a child had been left to pick up the pieces. It was a bitter reminder of the devastating consequences that followed when people failed to confront their own darkness. In the end, there was no happy resolution, no neat bow to tie around the story. The Langley mansion, once a symbol of wealth and status, now stood as a haunting reminder of the lives lost within its walls. The echoes of betrayal, rage, and manipulation still lingered in the air, a silent reminder of human frailty. For Rachel, the only thing left to do was raise her nephew, trying to piece together what little remained of the wreckage. For Tyler, the tragedy would never be forgotten, his young mind haunted by the actions of those who should have loved and protected him. As the seasons changed, the tragedy faded from the headlines. The world moved on, as it always does. But for those who had lived through it, the scars would never truly heal. The final lesson was simple. Love, when twisted by betrayal and unchecked emotions, could lead to irreversible destruction, and no one was ever truly prepared for the consequences. The house was still, unnervingly so. The stillness of the Langley mansion echoed with an emptiness that seemed to stretch beyond its walls, into the hearts of those left behind. Richard, Emily, Vanessa, 3 lives once so full of ambition, love, and dreams, were now reduced to nothing more than shattered memories. The pain of betrayal, that subtle and dangerous poison, had seeped into every corner of their lives. Richard had lied, not just to his wife and Emily, but to himself, hiding behind a mask of success and charm. Emily, so desperate to believe in the future that would never come, had allowed herself to be consumed by a love that turned toxic. And Vanessa, caught in her own web of jealousy and insecurity, had pushed them all toward this dark conclusion. None of them were untouched by the consequences. The emotional voids that had defined their relationships were now visible, gaping wounds that no amount of apology or remorse could ever heal. The story wasn't just about betrayal, it was a reflection of something much larger. The quiet desperation that had simmered beneath the surface of their lives was a direct result of societal pressures and expectations. Richard, the successful surgeon, was expected to have it all: career, family, a picture-perfect life. Emily, too, was drawn into this false narrative, her identity tethered to the idea of being the perfect partner, the perfect mother. And Vanessa, blinded by her own need to maintain her position in a world that valued status above all else, found herself spiraling. They were all products of their environment. Could any of them be blamed for seeking comfort in something as dangerous as an affair? Were their actions driven by personal flaws alone, or were they shaped by the expectations of a world that demanded too much from them? And could they have been different had they not been born into a society that placed such weight on appearances, on success, on having everything? It was easy to point fingers at the characters, but the reality was far more complex. They were all victims of a system that placed impossible demands on their shoulders, and it was this pressure that made them vulnerable to their darkest desires. The slow unraveling of their lives was a testament to how deeply manipulation could erode the foundation of any relationship. Richard had manipulated Emily with promises he never intended to keep, using his charm and power to control her heart. Vanessa, too, had played her role, weaving her own web of deceit, constantly pulling Richard closer while pushing him further from Emily. But it wasn't just about manipulation. It was the secrecy, the quiet betrayals, the lies left untold. Each character's insecurity, their need to possess, to control, had slowly but surely fractured the bonds that tied them together. What was left after all the lies and manipulation, a hollow shell of what could have been, a love so destroyed that even the smallest attempt at repair seemed hopeless. In the end, what remained was not love, but a painful reflection of the cost of their actions. They had all played their part in this tragedy, but the true toll was on their humanity. They had turned on one another, each person twisting reality to suit their own needs until there was nothing left to save. As the story unfolded, it became painfully clear. No one was innocent. Not Richard with his broken promises and lies, not Emily with her desperate hope and misplaced trust, not Vanessa with her jealous rage and need for control, and certainly not the world around them, which had fed into their insecurities, giving them the false belief that everything could be controlled, even love. There were no true victims in this story, only a tragic chain of events set in motion by choices made by each person involved. Each betrayal, each lie, each manipulation had its consequences. The lives of the innocent bystanders, Tyler, Rachel, would be forever altered because of the choices made by the adults who should have known better. The question that lingered was not, who is to blame, but rather, what have we learned? The story was a brutal reminder that the people who commit such acts of betrayal are not always the ones we expect. It's easy to point to the person who pulled the trigger, but the truth is that everyone's actions led to this moment. There is no escaping the consequences of our choices. Betrayal doesn't just destroy relationships, it destroys the very essence of what connects us as humans. The emotional ties that once bound Richard, Emily, and Vanessa were severed in an instant, replaced by distrust, guilt, and regret. And those left behind, Tyler, Rachel, were forced to live in the aftermath of a tragedy they didn't deserve. The haunting truth of this tragedy was that no one emerged unscathed. The story didn't have a neat ending, no final act of redemption or justice. It was a sad reflection of the devastating consequences of unchecked emotions, of lives driven by selfishness, and of a world that too often asks for more than it can give. The echoes of the past lingered in the silence of the Langley mansion, in the eyes of the innocent child, who would never truly understand the weight of the loss, and in the hearts of those who were left to pick up the pieces of a broken world. The lesson was clear. Betrayal, in all its forms, is the most destructive force of all.